Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in today. I am so excited to talk to you all about how you can stand out on video for hybrid work, whether you are presenting virtually to your team, leading a webinar, or maybe you're sharing an async project update. My name is Lorraine Lee and I'm the editorial director at Prezi, which basically means that each week my team collaborates with thought leaders to help them create great Prezi videos that we then curate and feature to our millions of users and beyond. So we've developed a pretty good sense, especially in the past year and a half, in terms of what works well and what doesn't work so well when it comes to virtual presenting. I want to take us back to 5 years ago. I had flown from San Francisco to New York and I was getting ready to enter the Empire State Building. I was so nervous. My palms were sweaty, my body was cold, yet somehow hot at the same time. I was a nervous wreck. But I somehow gathered my courage together and I stepped onto the elevator ready to head to the video studio on the 25th floor. I was getting ready for my first ever on-camera interview as an editor at LinkedIn. Now, being on video, doing video interviews, those were not part of my job description, but I knew even back then that video was becoming really important to the business world, and I wanted to make sure that I was ready for it. So here I was in New York, completely out of my element. I had scheduled 4 interviews across 4 days with CEOs, founders, and directors. Before the interviews, I spent hours researching them and researching their companies so that I could feel more prepared and a little less nervous. My first interview was with the CEO of the Clinton Health Matters Initiative, and when it was done, I cannot tell you how relieved I felt. I pushed ahead and I finished those other 3 interviews as well, still totally freaking out inside, but I made it. Over the course of my time at LinkedIn, I did 20 video interviews, and I even started my own video series. And for this last interview here, I'd gotten to a point where I felt comfortable enough to try a live interview. And even though I was still quite nervous, you can see that I'm smiling more and even enjoying myself. That live interview then gave me the confidence to step onto a tennis court in Berkeley, California, just a few weeks later for my first paid speaking gig as the on-court announcer for a professional tennis tournament. And this opportunity came about after an organizer there had seen my videos on LinkedIn and reached out. Fast forward a few years, and now I get to be here with all of you today. And I shared that story with you because I want you to see that it is very possible for all of us to learn how to get more comfortable and stand out on video. So in this short presentation, I'll be sharing my favorite 3 tips to keep your audience engaged when it comes to virtual presenting. As I mentioned before, my name is Lorraine Lee, and I'm the editorial director at Prezi, which is a virtual presentation and collaboration software for the hybrid office. Before Prezi, I was an editor at LinkedIn for 6 years, where I created and hosted its Female Founders video series, and I was part of the team that launched LinkedIn's first ever video product in 2016, so I've been around video for quite a few years now. Please feel free to connect with me. I frequently make posts about virtual presenting and video communications, and of course, LinkedIn. By the end of this presentation, my hope is that you'll be a little bit closer to this, equipped to create very impressive virtual presentations and videos that get these types of reactions from whoever is on the other side of your video. But first, before we can learn how to stand out on video, we need to acknowledge the reality of our day-to-day. We have all of these priorities and distractions in today's world that are making it harder to grab, and maybe even more importantly, keep people's attention. Now, this isn't much of a surprise when we see things like this on a daily basis, aka the before. Your audience's world is noisy. They are getting constantly bombarded with messages and content. Screen sharing is just not cutting it anymore as a way to be remembered or to stand out. And we can't blame Zoom fatigue because there are so many videos and other types of video content holding our attention. Now, if you take a moment to reflect on how many videos you're watching on a daily basis, I know personally my number is really up there, you'll realize that video fatigue is not the problem. We're just bored of seeing the screen shares and tired of seeing the same types of presentations over and over again. So how do we move away from the status quo? Today, I'll talk about my 3 favorite tips to keep audiences engaged when it comes to virtual presenting. So the first one is to use visuals. I think many of us have probably heard various statistics showing how powerful visuals are. For example, 90% of the information processed by the brain is visual, or 80% of people remember what they see versus hear and read, and 65% of people are visual learners. If you've ever told a story where everyone looked like this, you know that they were engaged, and the same can happen with your presentation. If you're using visuals well, your viewers are going to be more tuned in and actually retain what you're telling them, which is going to make for a more engaging presentation overall. Now, visuals can also be helpful in other ways too. So when a presentation looks like this, after a certain point, it can be hard to stay focused because nothing has changed on the screen to capture our attention. But when you add visuals, you give your audience different things to look at, which does help hold their attention. Now, the last way visuals can keep your audience engaged is through what I like to call the teacher effect. So this chart was edited to be partially transparent so I can walk my audience through it, similar to how a teacher would at the front of the classroom. Now, if a teacher is teaching well, students are going to pay attention, and the same can be said for presentations. If you're presenting well, your audience is going to be more engaged. Now, creating great visuals as someone who isn't a designer can be daunting, and I'm sure there are some of you out there who are thinking, I'm not a designer, I don't know how to use Photoshop, how can I create great visuals? And my answer to that is to show you this video here of career coach Diana Chan, who is using one of our templates and simply inserting her text and photos in it like you would on a PowerPoint. You definitely do not need to start from scratch to create something that looks good, because as you see here, there's no need for that. So once you have your visuals down, the next thing we'll want to focus on is using the Think, Do, Feel matrix. The Think, Do matrix was created by author and professor Andrew Abella. And what this matrix does is it helps you map out how your audience thinks and what they're currently doing. And then it helps you figure out how you want these two things to change after they see your presentation. Now, the Think Do matrix has since been modified by Prezi's head of remote, Spencer Waldron, to become the Think Do Feel matrix, because emotion is going to be so important in connecting with your audience and persuading them to make changes or to take action. Emotions are often going to be what end up driving decisions, not facts or logic. So take a stab at filling this out before your next presentation. This is what mine looked like for a recent keynote. This matrix is going to help you create a more memorable presentation and stand out because you'll have a better understanding of who your audience is and what you want them to walk away with, which of course is going to help you build the right content for them. Now, once you've filled this out, the next thing you'll want to focus on is adding movement to your presentation. So adding movement is going to spike your viewers' attention, boost dopamine in the brain, and keep them focused on your virtual presentation. While I can't promise your next video is going to be as exciting as a car chase, you can definitely get closer to it if you start adding some movement. So let's take a moment to reflect on the last 10 seconds or so. Were you looking at me, the video, or the picture of the car chase? Based on my past experience asking this question, most of you will say your eyes were drawn to the video, maybe a few of you were looking at me, but you're really seeing here firsthand just how powerful movement is in capturing attention. I like to recommend at least 2 slides or movements per minute in a virtual setting, and these don't need to be huge movements. For example, you can do fun things like this to keep your audience engaged. And creative movements like this also have the added benefit of creating novelty, which our brains love, and it helps us pay even closer attention. So movement was our third tip. Let's do a quick recap. In order to keep your audience engaged, you'll want to include visuals, fill out the Think, Do, Feel matrix, and add movement. I think from the past year and a half and all the new hybrid policies we're hearing from companies, both big and small, it is very clear that video is here to stay. The good news is that you're now all equipped with these tips for creating engaging virtual presentations, and you are well on your way to shining on the virtual stage. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.